Ooh, good afternoon and happy International Women's Day. How exciting is it to have a panel full of powerful women in leadership roles talking about women on the rise in leadership on International Women's Day? So I am Chelsey Parkinson. I'm the Director of Coaching and Training at PPCaDI, and I could not be more excited to be your moderator and facilitator for this discussion today. So without further ado, I will pass it off to Dr. Ramsey, and we'll kind of pop around the room and let you ladies introduce yourselves, what you do, your role, and just add something exciting for you about what we're here to talk about today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chelsey. I'm super excited that you are moderating this conversation for us today. I am Dr. Kiki Ramsey. I'm the founder and CEO of the Positive Psychology Coaching and Diversity Institute. Say it fast 5 times and you win the prize. AKA PPCaDI. And I am really, really excited to be here to talk about women on the rise. This has just been a love of mine, working with women in leadership for so long. And I love highlighting other women and accomplishments that women have actually added to the world. And so now we get to do that today and just have a really deep discussion about what it really means to be a woman on the rise or a woman in leadership in today's day, which is 2023. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah, amazing. Tomiko, do you want to introduce yourself next for us?
Awesome. Again, happy International Women's Day. It's a real treat, and I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Tomiko Jenkins. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I am currently the Assistant Vice President for Student Affairs and Dean of Student Persistence at Agnes College, which is historically a women's college in Decatur, Georgia. I do all of the within my portfolio, making sure that students are able to persist and complete. So anything that may get in the way of a student in terms of mental health and well-being, completing their degree, my leadership portfolio extends across campus to the folks that are in charge of those areas and make sure that students are healthy and well and they're able to complete their degree.
Yeah, and how perfect an alignment is that for what we're here to talk about today? If Agnes College is historically for women and we're talking about things that can get in their way of completion of a degree, we're going to talk about some of those things at the leadership level too, of what stops women from being successful in their leadership roles too. So I'm excited to hear about some parallels that you can draw for us there. Thanks, Tomiko. Deanna, I'll pass it off to you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Deanna Mackey. I am the general manager of KPBS in San Diego, California. And KPBS is the public media service for our region. I'm also the founder of Public Media Women in Leadership. It's a nonprofit that serves women in my industry to help them attain C-level positions. So we've been around for 8 years, and like Tomiko, our focus is helping women attain their goals and diversifying leadership in public media. So I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
I love that we have some common threads already. All right, Lisa, close us out.
We have so many common threads because I am the Senior Vice President and General Counsel of WETA and NewsHour Productions. So Deanna and I overlap in many ways, public media. But Tomiko, I am the very proud and grateful graduate of a women's college, and I attribute so much of who I am today and how I am to that experience. So yay you for working in that arena. I know single-sex institutions are kind of a rarity and sometimes under attack. My college is still all women, and I just think it's so important. So cool.
Yeah. Nice. So look at all of those common threads in this room, right? Just for our introductions of who we are, what we do, and what we stand for. And we've already drawn some threads. So for anybody who is joining us, you're going to find things that resonate with you, that connect you to this room. So think about your broader community and all of the places that you can draw threads with the women that you know. All right. Well, let's dive right in. The questions that I have for you today are impactful and they're meaningful, and they're going to help us really dig deep into what's the deal with women in leadership right now? What's going on with our gender in the leadership field, and what are some of the hot topics and challenges that we're facing out there? So to first question that I have for all of you is, what does it mean to be a woman in leadership?
Don't everybody jump in at the same time.
Calm down.
Well, I'll take a stab at it. I don't think there is one model. And I think it's really important to embrace that being a woman in leadership doesn't mean you have to be one specific thing. And I know I always felt like when I first started working in management leadership, I was quite young. I was in my 20s, and I didn't fit the mold at all. I was young, I was brown, I was from a station, the West Coast, that was very edgy, because I worked in public media for more than 30 years. And I wasn't afraid to speak up. And that really wasn't what was expected of me or accepted from me in our community, in my industry. And so today I'm seeing how women are really embracing who they are as leaders. You know, the young women who I feel and I'm thankful for are much more open and willing to push and demand change. And I'm seeing more women of my own generation, I'm a late X, who are finally, I think, willing to reach back and say what we experienced wasn't okay. And we want to create a path for future women where they can be who they are. They can bring their whole selves to work, and they can be embraced in these different leadership styles. And I also think different identities. We have, you know, racial and ethnic variations. We have demographic, generational differences. We have the LGBTQ community coming in, and we need to be open to creating space for all of those people as leaders.
Mm-hmm. I love the hint at allyship in there of, you know, older generations of women being allies to younger generations of women that are coming into the workforce to make the space for the things that didn't happen, that didn't exist many, many years ago for women who are coming into their leadership roles, and even diversifying that to say, you know, women is one classification. We have many, many identities that fall above, side to side of the fact that we are women also. And how can we make the space for women with all different types of identities and layers of identities to be successful in the workplace? I love that. Who else wants to add in?
I wanted to say definitely. No, go ahead, Tomiko. Go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to echo and just really lift up this idea of standing on the shoulders of folks that broke the glass ceiling for, you know, my opportunity to be at the table. And so I really take that seriously. I'm looking around to identify who can I pass the baton to. I think that is a responsibility once you have a seat at the table, to look around and see, okay, what other women may I be able to mentor, and also ensure that they have a seat at the table, so that I'm just not taking up space, right? But that I am lifting up issues that are critical, like the, you know, gender wage gap, right? Are we being paid to sit at these tables at the same rates or more of male counterparts? So I think issues like childcare that really help make sure that workplaces are inclusive and diverse. We need to have access to supports and resources that enable us to be there. And so those are different topics that I think once you get to the table, it's your responsibility to make sure that you become shoulders that someone else can stand on, and that you're a way for other women in leadership.
Yeah, I love that, Tomiko, too. I mean, I agree with you and Deanna both. I mean, I think that is so important that we do bear that responsibility, and with bringing up the next generation and our next even generation of women leaders. A lot of them haven't had the same opportunities as we have, or I say opportunities in the sense of we've always found it beautiful to come into the office a lot of times, because we get to build those relationships. But this next, you know, generation doesn't necessarily know that life, and so they don't really know that. So the work looks a little bit different. But I love what you said, Deanna, about being able to show up and be your authentic self. I really harp on that a lot, especially owning a diversity coaching company. We stand a lot for that. But I think we have to have an education in the workplace as well as what that really truly means. Because I think when we say show up your authentic selves and being able to do that, people think that means something different, like unprofessionalism or, that, but it's not that. It's just showing up, being able to be who I am, and, with all my values in the workplace and being comfortable with that. And so I think being a leader in today's society is just that, and finding a place that allows you to have that and have that psychological safety is something that I think is really important. And I think that that's what people and women are looking for today, is to be in organizations where they feel safe enough to be themselves.
Mm-hmm. Lisa, did you have anything to add to this question?
I'll throw out a question to the group. I think it appears anyway that we span multiple generations of age and experience. And I find as much as I want to be a mentor on the shoulders for the new generations of women entering the workforce, sometimes they seem to be a little maybe dismissive of my age or my not getting it or something. I'm just a different era. Does anybody else experience that? Because it's kind of sad to me, because I think I do still have something to offer.
Yes.
But I am finding that a little bit. Anybody else?
I'm wondering, Lisa, how much I see it in some of the media and some of the news, but I'm wondering how much mentorship and sponsorship is still being talked about or actually even being implemented in the workplace. And so that's a question of mine, because when you actually teach a person about sponsorship or about what mentorship looks like, then I think people are way more apt, especially, we're talking about women here, but I think, that generation or other generations are way more apt to actually take up sponsorship or seek out mentorship in an organization. And so I'm wondering, that's a question that I have, is like, what are the mentorship opportunities of an organization? Because are people being taught what it really means? Because for me, I would want, if I sought out a mentor, I'm looking for women who have done what I want to do. And no matter what age they are or anything like that, I just want somebody to show me how to get from A to where I want to be. And so I'm searching for that. So for me, I'm thinking, like, what are the opportunities that the organization are giving for mentorship, and actually explaining mentorship and sponsorship. So I don't know if you other ladies have what your organizations are doing about that as well, in light of Lisa's question.
I love Lisa's question. And Dr. Kiki, I really appreciate your response. I'm thinking a lot about what it means as an organization. What does belongingness look like, and how do we develop meaningful connections so that I could get to Elisa and make the ask to, I need a mentor. And how do I make that connection to build that relationship and the bridge in order to make the ask? And I think it's been very different, with all the impact of COVID and being online and getting back to in person, and what it looks like to develop interpersonal relationships have just changed drastically. So a lot of what we've talked about is how are we creating community, and community that allows for this level of connection? Because in order for me to approach any of you here, and all of you would be wonderful mentors. For me, I'd love to be able to just sit at your tables and learn from all of your expertise. But there's got to be space available for me to feel that psychological safety to develop the connection to make the ask. And so I think, being able to take those steps back a little bit as organizations and to really look at what spaces are we creating that allow folks to be able to make those connections, to show up, to make the ask so that we can get the sponsorships and the mentorship. That's sort of my lens on it.
Yeah, Tomiko, what comes up for me while you're talking is that generationally, I think the ask has been stigmatized a little bit too. So I didn't share my background, but I grew up in the DoD. So I spent the last 10 years of my life inside the DoD, which is a typically male-dominated environment. The ask did not feel safe. So having Elisa would have been great. And there are female leaders in the DoD, but the idea of asking and the stigma attached to being a younger female in a male-dominated environment and asking for help with my career and asking, there is a weird juxtaposition there between you have to have enough confidence to ask for help and also be confident that your organization doesn't view you as lesser because you are asking. And I think that belongs to younger females right now in the workplace too. I am not said age any longer, but I do have a lot of employees that fall in that age range. And I think it's still very similar for young women, which is we want to have the space and the psychological safety to be able to ask because we know that the Lisas in our organizations have so much experience and so much knowledge and know how to get us where we want to be. And also, if I ask, what does that person think about me? What happens in my performance review? So I think there's that just from my perspective of growing up as a, younger professional more recently would have been my hesitance to ask for help from a Lisa.
So I'm curious, Deanna, you've organized a group with this specific goal in mind, right? The public media, women in public media is intended to offer those kinds of mentorships. Are you getting a lot of active participation?
Yes, we had a one-to-one mentor program for 3 or 4 years, and we had 200 matches. So 200 young women matched with 200 women who were either middle management or senior executives, because we had 2 levels in the program. And we're currently running a CEO, COO boot camp for women and men of color. And we're in our second cohort. And both times we've had about 75 applicants for 20 spaces. So at least in our industry, the interest is very high. People are coming forward. But I will say, Lisa, that I know what you're talking about as far as, and I see it more with some of the younger generation in relation to new platforms. Lisa and I are both in media, so I'm talking about digital platforms and social media and so on, and some of the sensibilities that somebody of our age may not have the experience in those platforms. And the truth is, I'm not a digital native. I was working on a typewriter as a journalist. So, I don't have the life experience of somebody in their 20s or 30s. But what I found in those meetings is if I do use a lot of social media and I'm active on it. So I can speak to my experience there and what I'm seeing. And I find if I just let younger people who have that life experience sort of lead the conversation, and I just interject when I have something of value to share, over time, they realize, okay, she's not a Luddite here, is participating in the world. And I think that's important. But I do think as senior leaders, it's really important for us to be reading the latest information about whatever is happening in our industry, what's happening in leadership, kind of what's happening in the world, frankly, because I'm a really firm believer that just because I attained, what for me was my dream job, I'm not done learning. I'm learning every single day. And I'm very intentional about sharing that at my station and in the women's community I lead, because I think it's important for people to know when you've reached a position of influence, you're not done. We're never done. And things in the world and in our industry keep changing, and we have to keep up and we have to keep evolving. And I think also share when it's hard for us, because I think that's something that I didn't see a lot of when I was coming up. So you just think somebody gets to the highest position and they're like, on high, and it's all great and everything's great all the time. And we all know when you are in high leadership positions, it isn't great all the time. So I think talking about that, and we try to do that a lot in the women's group, is really important.
Yeah.
So jumping off the it isn't great all the time, there was an article and Kiki's comment about the fact that women entering the workforce now are having such a different experience than we did. There was an article some time ago about the importance of friends that you make in your first jobs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those people often stay with you for many, many years. And just last night, I had dinner and went to a play with my two dear friends who I met at my second job. And those friendships, which until more recently have always been with other women, that's changing a little bit, which is nice. They get you through the tough times and the frustrations and the, I guess it's so obvious to say that. Of course they do, but they're in the same workplace. They're experiencing the same people, the same dynamics, the same, like, what do you mean you don't understand what to be is? And I really am sad for this new generation of people who get all the flexibility of hybrid work and none of that crazy important, like, personal connection.
Yeah, it's interesting, about that, because of course I study it and I see it in so many different organizations that we work with. But I think we because we know what it's like to go to work. We know what it's like to have a work husband, and, and just somebody who you can confide in, go to lunch with, and do all those things. But our newer generation of young women who are coming up in these organizations, they don't know it, so they don't think they're missing out on anything, right? You
don't know what you don't know, right?
You don't know what you don't know. And I think that for them, that could actually, per se be a plus. But I think for an organization, we do, as Tomiko talked about, have to figure out how to build community and connection, because at the end of the day, when we talk about cultures in organizations running smoothly, and it's all around connection. Like, you can't have really super hard, difficult conversations if you don't have a real connection, if you don't have a real understanding. And so somehow us as organizations are going to have to find ways to cultivate community, but in these leaders who don't necessarily know what that really means because they've never really experienced it. And I think I read an article about how just cultures across the country and across the world are absolutely having to change, because these, our younger generation just might not, they're not coming into the office. They're refusing, and they're even not taking jobs if it's not hybrid. So we have to figure that out, in a sense, on the models that we're using now, which are mostly people are using hybrid, or we're going to be in a position where we won't necessarily be able to mentor these younger, generations, because they ain't coming into the office.
One of the things I just wanted to lift up, I'm thinking a lot about, again, of course, I should have shared, my training is that of a mental health clinician. And so I'm always thinking about health and well-being and resources and support. And I think folks, are still really navigating all the grief and trauma associated with the shared experience we've had, right, through COVID, and COVID isn't over, and we know that. And so as they show up into spaces, we really just don't know what folks are dealing with. We never did know, right? But now we understand that what we thought we knew may be exacerbated by the experience, that we've all had. And so I think organizations that figure out a way to really have supports that are accessible, that folks can really utilize to take care of themselves, so that they can be whole and healed when they come and make these connections within the organization, right? Do we know about our EAP? Are there massages available on campus? You know, just those different things that are readily available during the day so that I'm not taken off, right, to utilize it. Or there is a good policy in place so that I can take off if I need to go and have my hour at the therapist or whatever it is that I'm doing to take care of myself. And so I think those things are really important to insert into the conversation, and making sure that there are resources and policies that support folks within the organization to prioritize their health and well-being in very real ways.
Yeah. Something that I was thinking about while you all were talking about that is also remembering the 3 or now 4-year period that we're in is a different percentage of somebody's professional work life than somebody else's. So for me, for example, I've been, professionally working for about 15 years. 4 years is a pretty decent chunk of 15. Now, if you knock 5 or 10 years off of my age, which is some of these women that we're talking about, 3 or 4 years of COVID style work environment is a massive chunk of their professional experience. So they don't have the benefit of knowing, well, this was a blip, but it has changed everything. So if we draw this back to unique challenges to women and we think about what the work from home situation has taught us, I think about me, I have a 3-year-old. So I raised my child all during COVID. Dealing with being on screen. Sometimes she's home. At least half of you have met her when she's popped on during a session or in the middle of a work call. And that could never have happened when I was in the DoD. Like, we barely even talked about our children. You couldn't bring your kids to work, all of these things. So if our baseline has moved, and it has, right? I think we can all kind of know and accept, regardless of what came before, our baseline is different. So if our baseline has shifted, what's our collective role and responsibility in moving women in the workplace forward?
Yeah. I think that we start with at least addressing policies and potentially procedures that are happening in the workplace in terms of flexibility. We were having a pre-show before the show, and we were talking about how we have, the majority of us, not all of us, but some of us have children who are on this call, and Kenna is my girl, right? So she shows up, but Mackenzie and Trey show up to our meetings as well. And it's just really having that flexibility. How flexible are we in the workplace with certain situations? Because most of us are still working, hybridly, whether we're at home or someplace else and then in the office. And so what are the, have the policies changed? Have the procedures, are the companies flexible? And I think if it is not, then I think it's our responsibility to potentially help try to spearhead what that looks like. I can remember reading when gosh, I can't even think, Facebook, I can't even think of her name. Sandra.
Cheryl
Sandberg. Yeah, Sandberg. When she created a policy of getting the parking spaces that were closer to the building for women who were pregnant and that kind of thing. Like, these are real things that can actually go into effect in terms of policies and procedures. I think it's our responsibility, if we're dealing with it, or we know that other women in the organization have this problem and are dealing with it, then it's us as senior leaders in organizations to say, all right, what can I do about this? How can I affect change in the organization so that's better for everybody else?
Powerful. I'm thinking about the ways in which, in full disclosure, I'll share that I have 5 precious humans that I'm responsible for. And I'm thinking about the ways in which in the past, like Chelsey was saying, I didn't talk about parenthood. Really, this fear of not being considered for promotions. What does that mean in terms of my capacity and bandwidth, to work, like, those things being in question because of this idea that, I'm going to have a sick child or something that I need to go and that sort of thing. And so it's a really powerful time that we're even able to talk about the fact that we have other responsibilities outside of the organization that include caretaking, even of, parents, right? As folks get sick and have been impacted, what does it mean that I need to go and take care of my mother, right? That's got COVID or whatever that means. But now that we can have these expanded conversations and come out of the shadows a bit around the different hats, the juggle, we were talking about the juggle in the sort of the pre-show, the juggle is real, being able to figure out like what your rhythm and flow is in addition to what you offer an organization. I have these other lived experiences. And in what ways can we make it okay for the folks that work within our organization to name that, to say, because then the authenticity plays in, right? I can be more authentic when I can talk about the fact that I need to get Lauren to her medical appointment at 9 a.m. and I'll be back at 10 and you'll get the full me because I've taken care of the responsibilities and the things that I value. So I think that that's very important, that we can have expanded, shared live experiences and really talk about the different roles that we play.
I think you touched on such an important piece. So for anybody who's following along or who has worked with me, I'm a huge cognition nerd. I like to tie everything back to what's going on in your brain, what's going on in your body, and how does that impact the way that you show up and the way that you perform. And so what I'm thinking about with what Tomiko just shared is, if you are constantly worried about what your boss thinks of you, what other people think of you, if you feel like you have to leave half of yourself at home, or you're sneaking out to get on your cell phone to check on your kid, all of that causes stress responses in the body. And you're essentially donating a portion of your cognition to that. So your ability to be as effective and as productive at work, you might be butt in seat for 8 hours a day. Are you really working to your full capacity in that 8 hours? Where if you knew that you had an hour dedicated to go see your therapist, if you knew that if you took 3 hours to take your child to the doctor and came back and nobody was going to look sideways at you, your ability to transition and transitioning back into work is different than compartmentalizing. And I think that's the shift that what I'm hearing we'd love to create for people is, previously you compartmentalized. You left your home stuff at home, you left your work stuff at work, and they didn't bleed, and you tried not to crisscross them, although work always came home with you, home couldn't come to work, right? So now what I hear is that we're trying to create a transition where I can manage my other stuff, but I don't have to forget about it. I don't have to pretend like it's not happening. And because I was given the space to manage it, then when I get to work, I'm there. I'm stoked. First of all, I feel supported and held. I feel like I get to be a whole damn person in my job with all of the other stuff that goes on. Imagine what that creates internally for somebody, for their commitment to their organization, to their work, and how they feel about themselves. This company values my whole self enough to let me show up. So I'm curious, Lisa or Deanna, how does that resonate with you? Are your organizations doing anything along those lines? What are your thoughts here?
Well, I brought my kids into work on snow days all the time, and they are both now in their mid-20s. But I never felt sort of what some of you are describing, that I had to leave my kids out of the picture. But I think what can be hard is feeling like you're not a good enough mom and you're not a good enough lawyer, counselor, general manager, CEO. And because you're not giving enough time to either anymore, because you have these amazing pulls on your time. My daughter's like, you were the only mom who wasn't at the kindergarten Halloween party. I'm like, was I though? And you know what? My 26-year-old daughter now thinks I'm like a rock star so I think it's so hard for women and women who are caretakers to give themselves some grace around all the competing demands on their time. And I think that's something, maybe it's changing, but I think that's something that men in the workforce don't really appreciate, and they don't experienced quite as much. So I think that's, anyway, for me, that was huge.
Yeah. Just both sides of it, right? Like how you feel about yourself and your roles, how your organization feels about you and your roles. And it's beautiful that you had an experience where you could still have your kids involved, but we still have our internal dialogue, our internal monologues about ourselves and our roles, and feeling like, if I'm over here, then I'm not over here. And if I'm over here, then I'm not over here. It can be this endless, seek the juggling. We're back to the juggling again. Yeah. Deanna,
Deanna, go ahead.
Yeah, I like Lisa, I was very fortunate because I've spent most of my career in public media. I raised my 3 children while I worked at a station that was very family friendly. And I also was very intentional when I got into management of showing that. My children, after school, sometimes they came to the office, and we actually had a lunchroom where if you had a school-age child that, was well-behaved, they could come and sit in the lunchroom after school and do their homework. And we had PBS Kids airing. And it was a very supportive environment for that. And to Tomiko's comment, I now have my mother living with me and leading the station I lead now. I talk about it all the time because I want people to know that I have a multi-generational household. I have responsibilities within that experience, taking her to doctors and such. And it's also why, I'm not willing to be out every night because I want to spend time with her and my husband. Family is really important to me. So I think that talking about that is really critical. And I also think, to what Lisa said about the pool and the guilt. When I founded Public Media Women in Leadership, the first few years, I did a lot of talks about managing that guilt. And when I was leading women, either in my stations or through mentoring, I have a sensibility about this that I think you have to decide if you're going to take that guilt on or not. And what I mean by that is, I knew I was going to be a working mother. I didn't have my first child till I was 30. And a lot of the reason I initially did was I am Latina and Irish. And so it really wasn't acceptable to not have a child. And now I have 3 grown children. But I think that, I knew I was going to be a working mom. I was very committed to my career. And I just decided that when I was with my kids, I would be with them 110%. And when I was at work, I would do my work 110%. And I'm not being Pollyannish. Of course, things came up. I was at work, a kid got sick, I had to go get the kid. But most of the time that doesn't happen. Most of the time you can make a decision to turn off your phone, to say, I'm not going to work from the time I get home, whatever that is, 5:36, until the children are in bed. And then if you want to do stuff after, you just do stuff after. And that was how I lived my parenting life. And I felt like it worked really well. And then the times I wanted to go to the volunteer at the school or something, and like Lisa, no, I could never be room mom. I could never do things like that, but I could attend a party. I was the Girl Scout troop leader for 13 years. You make choices about your time. And I was very open with my staff that I was doing these things, because I also think it's part of being in the larger community. And I think it's also owning, and I used to say this to my kids and some of my staff I was closer to as well. As women, we make people. So we make the people, we have to care for the people, and we have to be involved in the people's lives. And so that just needs to be owned by us, and I think advocated by us and pushed out there, because you can't just have a child and then have a job and say, oh, I'm only going to deal with the child before 9 a.m. and after 5:30 p.m. That isn't realistic.
Yeah. Deanna, I love what you said. I call it thriving through the work-life unbalance. Because it's not, it's absolutely not balanced. And I'm like you, I run, PPCaDI. I'm also the class mom, but me and the teacher, we have an understanding. She got 2 because she wanted me to be the class mom, but she knew my time was limited, but there were some things I could do. And then the other class mom fills in the gap because I can't always do all the things. But like tomorrow, I blocked off my day. If I know in advance, I block it off, and I'm going to chaperone my daughter's field trip, right? It's a decision. It's a choice that I made. Do I have a ton of work to do? Absolutely. I have so much work to do, but it's a choice that I'm making to go on this field trip and to block off my entire day to be with her, because I did make her. And I want to have those experiences. And I think that's, what we're talking about here, right? Like there's a difference. This seems like there's a difference in terms of responsibility that we as women have, right? I don't know if y'all agree with me, versus what men necessarily have. I'm not saying that men don't have responsibility, but there's this innate thing in us that we have when we're caregiving for parents or children or anybody else, and just managing all of it. And that's the season I'm in right now as we talk.
So do you all think that nurturing sensibility is a plus or a minus in the workplace?
I think it's an absolute plus.
I think it's a plus.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a plus. I mean, I think that we as women, that's something that we bring to the workplace that can absolutely benefit our colleagues, especially when it comes to being able to show compassion and empathy in the workplace. Those things are absolutely needed. I was just reading an article in the Harvard Business Review the other day talking about the new leadership, the new CEOs. Now they're searching for CEOs who have what we used to call soft skills, which is, what
EI and
exactly right. It's not now just, you got these management skills and we need this. We need leaders with those other skills that I think as women naturally bring. That's just, kind of from what I've seen, it's a plus, but I would love to hear from some of the other women here.
I'm thinking about a lived experience that I had where I was being considered for a promotion. And my style is very much so of being like trauma informed, psychological safety, self-mastery, right? Thinking a lot about emotional intelligence, and that's sort of how I show up in spaces. And there was this conversation around like, can I be decisive enough? Will my team respect spaces where we can make collaborative decisions versus someone that leads with more of a tell everybody what to do, right? And so how sometimes leadership is packaged, the ideal leader is often packaged like with having more masculine, characteristics, quote unquote, whatever that means. I mean, I'm a believer in a cocktail, like you need to show up contingent on what's going on at that moment and, make decisions and be able to flow in and out of different skill sets. But it was interesting to me that would be a conversation or a question. Like, absolutely, being thoughtful, creating psychological safety allows for folks to breathe and make decisions that are going to be impactful and positive. Why wouldn't you want an environment that would allow for that kind of space? But that's very new. It's trendy. Now it's like we want leaders that understand trauma-informed spaces. So now's the time, right, for that. But, kind of given my experience, I've lived through organizations where that was a question. Can this woman in leadership lead because she's seen as more nurturing? And what does that mean to make decisions that are decisive? And you got to be, quick on that. And so you can do both. Being able to, show up and do both, I think is very important. And, women sometimes, are packaged or expected to be sort of like ladylike, I think, in situations. And when you, aren't able to, I think, flow in and out of both, it just creates interesting conversation, it seems.
And that flexibility is key. So everybody else in the room has more than one child, except for me, but I am one of many children. So I think parenting is kind of the original form of leadership, right? Your children needed different things. you had expectations, right? Just like in an organization, we have performance metrics, we have things that have to get done, but different people do things differently. Different people require different things. So if we think about parenting, and certainly not every woman is a parent, but the idea of this child needs this and that child needs that, and the end state is still, we have these expectations and we have these containers and parameters, but how they get there is going to look different. So I think there's an innate ability for women to be able to flex in some of those spaces because we've had to do it in other roles in our life. Even with my own child, and I only have one, but sometimes Kendra needs, and I'm a pretty direct human being. Sometimes she needs direct, assertive mommy. And sometimes she needs, we're going to get eye to eye. We're going to tap into some empathy. We're going to figure out what's going on there because the result is what we're after. And so what I love about what Tomiko is talking about is we're starting to understand that we have always been looking at details and results as the indicators for success and not the ways that we get there. And yet, the ways that we get there is 99% of the work product, is 99% of the outcome. How we're doing the doing is how we get the doing done. And so for me, what I'm hearing in the way you're all talking is women have a particular edge and a particular set of tools that we've garnered and gleaned from other places in our lives. I'm going to use my black leggings example. I think that a woman's toolkit is a lot like a good pair of black leggings, where they are applicable in many situations, right? You can put on some heels and a nice top and you can wear them out to dinner. You can wear them in the gym. You can, dress them up, dress them down. Your toolkit as a woman and the things that you have learned and adapted throughout the many different roles in your life are like that pair of black leggings. So being able to use them in multiple situations, I think that's a superpower that is inherent to the female population.
Yeah, absolutely is. And I think that we have, going back to responsibility, how do we then make sure that the rest of the organization and the rest of the leaders on our teams understand that superpower is a superpower that we're bringing to the table that is there for everybody to use to make the organization better, right? And then how do we get more women at that same table on that level so that we can show that diversity of thought, diversity of gender, diversity of, color, sexual orientation, religion, these are valuable things, right? Yeah. How do we get that to the table within the organization? Because, we were just talking about stats and the stats are still the same and they've been the same for years. When I did my PhD, a couple of years ago, it was the same. 35% of the population are, senior leaders are women. And so therefore, males occupy 65% of the senior leadership positions. And we also can talk about, I know we mentioned it a little bit earlier, the wage gap is still different. Why? Why is this when we bring so much to the table in terms of diversity? In terms of skill set, in terms of all of these things, we're still here, but we're on the rise because that's what we're talking about. So that's the good thing. We're on the rise. But how do we get more?
Yeah, I love that question. So I guess the way that we're really exploring that is how do we go from 35%? Like what are your thoughts on how, a couple of years from now we reconvene and we have this conversation on International Women's Day and it's, 5 years from now. How do we see that number is not 35% anymore, but it's up?
I think it's a lot about mentoring and very intentional identifying people. Like for me and my industry through public media, women in leadership, that's a lot of what we do. We're identifying people who we think have potential, whether they have applied and made it into our boot camp or are in a mentor program, and then having very direct conversations with them about what is holding them back. And a lot of times it seems to be a mix of confidence or this idea that, well, I don't know all these things. And you all know the stat that men will apply for a job whether they have any of the qualifications, and women will not unless they have all 10 of the qualifications. So trying to help, I think, women see that in other aspects of their lives, whether it's through their volunteerism, through their parenting, through board service they've done, they actually may have some of these skills that they're not doing in their current role. And then encouraging them to throw their hat in the ring. And I tell women all the time, when you go through an executive search, it is a grueling process. There is so much preparation required. So if you're sitting around and letting decades go by going, well, I'm not ready, I'm not ready, I'm not ready. And then you're finally ready in your 40s or something, and you try, you probably aren't going to get the first one, because the people you're competing against, this could be their third, fourth, fifth time they've been through one. And just going through the process and understanding the expectations is really important. So I think being very frank with women about what these experiences are like, and then getting them to believe in themselves and do it and try.
I love that.
It's been powerful for me to serve at a historically women's college, to see sort of as soon as a student enters the college experience, their first year, first day, we're setting them up with opportunities and access to opportunities to make sure that they're poised to lead. And so I'm thinking a lot about who gets that access, what communities, are able that know about these opportunities, and who then is afforded the privileges of having the access to professional development, educational opportunities that are, free as possible from patriarchy, right? So that they can learn in an environment that really centers the woman in leadership, global leadership, and opportunities to see what that looks like and be mentored. And so I'm thinking about the ways in which we create those opportunities and that access. For a lot of us, we have hiring privileges. And so when resumes come in, making sure that we, double back to say, what about this one? Let's have a conversation with this candidate. Whereas sometimes maybe that person wouldn't be brought in for an opportunity, but we, recognize some things differently, right? And can afford someone at least an interview so that they can have an opportunity to have that conversation with the hiring managers. But it's really about creating opportunities that allow for this greater access for exposure and development and training. And I think we all here have the resources to create those opportunities and, allow for folks to have a seat at the table, to, gain opportunities in that way.
Yeah, love that. So we've got mentorship and advocacy, which I think is super important. What else?
I'm really interested in how to how to support the building of confidence. For me, that was an enormous, very slow and long climb. And it's as so many of the other things we've discussed, it's a juggle or a balancing act, because you're too brash, you're too, frankly, out of your depths, and that doesn't work, right? You have to have a basis for the confidence. But so many women, as Deanna said, do have that basis, and they just don't recognize it, or they don't feel comfortable with it, or I don't know. But that, to me, that's so critical to success. You have to be able to speak with confidence and courage of your convictions, and acknowledge when you don't know something, but you'll go find out or something. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I don't know, maybe this is a gross generalization, but I do think women often struggle with confidence. Is that a gross generalization?
No, I don't think so.
I think, women have shrunk themselves. I have always been an assertive and direct person. And when I was in my early 20s in my workplace, it was not seen as a positive. Now that I'm a coach and, a rehabilitated chief of staff and head of HR, I would not have been successful managing entire teams without directness and assertiveness. So I think there is that idea of shrinking. Something my coach always says to everybody that works with him is to remember that confidence is not a requirement, it's a result. Or rather, it's not a requirement, it's a result, right? Like when you do the things, then you can find the confidence, but you can do the things without the confidence. And I think as women, we wait. When I'm confident, then I will do the thing versus, and I think some of these things we're talking about can help fill those gaps in by being an advocate for somebody that you notice should have confidence and isn't using it, by mentoring somebody who has this beautiful resume of experiences and the ability to be so much more, to Deanna's point, is to, help boost them up and to have those conversations of, this is what experience is going to be like, but look at what you've already done. Look at who you already are. So how we bridge the gap between what we're seeing with women in leadership, lacks of confidence and not using their tools and skills. And we have some tangible ways to do that through advocacy and support and mentoring and coaching. Kiki, do you have something to add?
Yeah, no, I was going to say that, we may not always be in the position to be the person who gives, but we may be in a position to be the person who gets them what they need in terms of support. Right. So whether it is, blazing the trail so that they can get mentorship or sponsorship, or blazing the trail so that they can get leadership development or coaching or training or something like that, we may be in that position to be able to give, but we might not be able to necessarily give our own time. And that is okay. Right. Like it's okay that we don't have to give our own time. And I think that's another thing about, us as in, women in leadership, since we are in such high positions, we don't always have the time for all the things. We won't have the time for all the things, right? Because the imbalance is real, right? Like, so we don't always have the time, but can we find the supports that are needed for other women to grow into what they need to grow in? And maybe even our peers on the same level. Like we all need something different at whatever points we are in our leadership position. And so, we're all on this call at different places in our leadership positions, and we all need something different. So are we even advocating for ourselves to get what we need in terms of us continuing to grow? Because I think it was either Lisa or Delaney who just said that I'm always a student. And I put that in one of my conversations with my students at Life University. I said, I am first and foremost always a student of life and my craft. I'm always learning. So I need to, I show up every day as a student. I'm asking questions. I'm really trying to figure that out for myself so that I can continue to grow. Because as we know, our organizations and the people who we mentor normally stop at the level that, if they reach the level that we are, they stop there. Organizations don't normally grow past their top leader. So are we still learning ourselves?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was Deanna who said that, so I have to give credit to Deanna.
Thanks, Deanna. Thanks, Lisa.
Well, ladies, I want to be respectful of everybody's time, and we are approaching the top of the hour. So I have to thank all four of you for joining me today to chat about women in leadership and how we make space for the next generations of women. This will not be the end of this conversation. So for anybody who is following along, make sure that you connect with us on all of our socials, because we continue to have these conversations monthly about different topics in leadership. So again, I want to wish everybody a happy International Women's Day, and nothing but gratitude for this wonderful conversation we have had today. So enjoy the rest of your week. PPCaDI appreciates all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.